So in all of your, work in psychedelia, I mean, the reason I wanted to talk to you was I don't know, I got a sense of just like kind of like a real wisdom that's come from years of, being involved in psychedelics. So what, where you're at in your world, in your life, what can you tell someone maybe a little bit younger about death?
Well, death is an interesting concept to ask a person approaching 80, which I most certainly am, but in good health. But I think increasingly about it, but not enough to distract oneself from this glorious existence. But pitching forward to that moment, you could look at it as a sorrowful ending and detachment from the beauty and friendships and love of this world. That would be quite horrible, of course, saying farewell, ultimately poignant, tears, no, I don't want to die, that sort of thing. Yeah. But the other way to look at it, and I think Tim considered it, was that it's the interface between life and death, and that could be the greatest possible adventure of all time during one's life, short of being born. So one might go with a sense of joy. If you trust the universe, which one might after having this long life, these glorious mountains around us, and the thoughts and friendships, and if the universe has given us that blessing, then likely that's not the end of it. I can't imagine an eternity of blackness and a cold void forever and ever. We came from that into this world. And I suspect there's more. How could there not be? So.
And how have you kind of personally healed after, losses of people close to you?
Well, that's happening increasingly frequently.
Yeah.
I'm 76 and friends drop off.
Yeah.
And then one's number comes around for oneself. But there seem to be a few more years of very good living ahead.
Has that made them maybe more precious?
I think one realizes the transience of life, but also how precious and delicate it is. One can leave like that, or one could have long notice. Hard to decide which is better.
Yeah. Your feeling on a God or a concept of God is love.
Right. Well, of course, God is in everything. It's in the grass and our fingertips and these great, I wish people on this film could see what we're surrounded by. These great craggy monoliths and buttes made of red rock, kind of a sacred area for the local tribes. Magnificent setting. Right, so of course God permeates every atom, every electron, to the far reaches of the universe and beyond. But I see ultimately that great spirit is benevolent. If it weren't, how could we feel what we do feel? How could we feel our health and the pleasure of this beautiful day and friendships?
Yeah.
Absolutely. One of the classic transformations in a significant psychedelic experience is a death experience. There are many categories of classical experiences: a death experience, birth experience, various states of consciousness. But death experience is frequently one of the early ones that one encounters. That could be a little disconcerting initially. You're taking a drug which moves your mind in so many ways. You ask yourself, how can the mechanism of life, of consciousness, be maintained with all of these forces going this way and that. You feel like you may die, that you're on a toxin, that you're going to die. So that can produce anxiety. If one is among experienced friends, one can be talked through that. People come to the conclusion in death experiences of seeing themselves as collections of atoms or dancing molecules, and that they are dead, already dead, that they are comprised primarily of a vacuum, occupied by, calcium atoms and phosphorus atoms and space primarily. And so the question of what is life and death becomes very profound. There's an ease that occurs after a death experience, though. Once one goes through it, one is, in a sense, relieved of many burdens and unnecessary responsibilities. So on the other side of a death experience is a type of healing. Then there are birth experiences where one feels born into a new consciousness, finally awake, subsequent to one's physical birth. And that has its own glory as well.
Well, you'd mentioned that, we're mostly empty space. The space between the electrons and the center of the atom is huge compared to their size, so we are mainly empty. What do you think consciousness is?
Well, that's the eternal question.
It really is.
There are so many. Where does space begin and matter end? Where does mind begin and brain end? The interface between the great dualities. I think neuroscientists see consciousness as just a collection of neuroanatomical loci, if you will, that interact. We have our vision, we hear things, we feel things, we internally process thoughts, and the consciousness simply circulates among seeing, hearing, feeling, one's posture. It's almost a Buddhist concept that consciousness is only about 5 or 6 perceptions that constantly circulate among themselves. Notice, for example, right now, I notice that I'm seeing these marvelous plants. And I notice that I'm hearing the birds tweeting, the ravens in that far tree. And I can feel the warmth of my hands and the pressure of the grass beneath me. Meanwhile, multiple thoughts are occurring, appearing and disappearing. So the neuroscientists and ancient thinkers in Buddhism are a type of convergence into the nature of consciousness. It may be very complex, but there are certain simple aspects of it. How good to be awake. I'm reminded of a early question of the Buddha 2,000 years ago, where one asked him, are you a man? No. Are you a god? No. Well, what are you? And he responded, I'm awake.
So where do you think that if this interconnectivity is sort of seems integral to life and maybe even the definition of it in a way, then would you say people who feel depressed or experience depression have the absence of that connection? Or is that something that you've investigated also in your studies?
Well, I really haven't investigated psychiatric disorders such as depression, other than that it's extraordinarily common, so I can only speak to it as a man who has encountered people that are very depressed. I'm not really subject to depression. I can't explain why. In the 20 years in maximum security environments, doing a life sentence, losing one's family and loved ones and dignity, it would be easy to be depressed, a feeling of hopelessness and despair. But somehow I never felt that. I saw people spiral into curling up into balls into depression, and you could see it in their drawn faces and their haunted eyes. But I was spared that. I found it helps to, if one is feeling low, to engage in some work. Work is very healing, some activity, something that has a future, something that has a promise, something that has a great positive change. And in my case, it was the struggle to return to my loving wife and family against all odds. Getting up in the morning and doing legal work and filing motions. I filed 1,000 motions, all denied, except the last one. So it's something of a miracle to even be able to talk to you like this.
Yeah.
So, for those that are depressed and have a great sadness, existential despair and sadness, I can only suggest being active, engaging with others. It helps not to focus so much on oneself, me, but to think of others, perhaps in more difficult situations. Look for others that are having problems and try to help them. That gets oneself out of this internalness, focusing on the I eternally, and opens one's heart to others, and that's a natural way to end a depression.
So, I know that there's a statistic that Genghis Khan has had the largest impact on the human genome just by the number of children that he had while he was active. And you have to have opened and expanded maybe the most minds of any human ever?
Well, I don't look at it that way. I don't think of it that way. Of course, there was Nicky Sand before me who did about 130 million doses. Wonderful Nicky. There have been a number of individuals responsible for large acid batches, but we're speaking only of a narrow, small psychedelic community versus the great spiritual teachers, of which we hardly can equate. But one does, in underground manufacture, think about the responsibility of affecting millions of consciousnesses, and that's a very serious moment of reflection. One can't go about it casually or with a cavalier attitude.
Sorry, Jeff says we need to record Kim.
Who's Kim?
Kim Dudeen is the organizer here of Trailblazers.
Is she speaking?
I'm not sure.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, for the video, okay.
Yeah, she'll be around.
So,
Not to interrupt. Okay?
No. So, but you took that very seriously.
Good luck editing this. Good luck. Well, yes. I can tell you how seriously underground chemists tend to take it. At least the ones that do global scale batches. That's rather simple. Let me get this car past. Okay. Let me frame it like Nicky Sand did. And perhaps I did. There's a period in an underground laboratory where the swirling mixture of chemicals becomes psychoactive. And it's not uncommon at that moment for underground manufacturers to offer a prayer. Offer a prayer that this substance be benevolent in the world, that it might heal suffering, that it bring peace and tranquility and affection to many minds. And only with that particular prayer or blessing would these materials go out into the world. And that's an absolute necessity, to respect medicine. I would suggest that most employees of the pharmaceutical industry, even those doing antibiotics, regard their medicines the same way.
And how do you feel now that you have had this almost like humanity-changing impact on the world? How does that feel as a person?
It sounds a little unusual for you to frame it like that, because I don't think about that so much or dwell on it. Whatever I've done is minor, but I hope in that minor effort there's been a favorable influence, and so I don't regret things, and I feel very positive about the past and the future. I just hope that what was done reverberates among everyone. We all do things in our own way. Just the kindness of this invitation to speak to you, okay? Just that gentle openness is your own way of embracing the world. So we all have our little methods, and yours is no less than mine.
Interesting. Do you have anything else, Ralph?
I guess for you, is there one can you identify one of the most profound or the most profound experience you've had? Have you had the most profound experience on one of your journeys?
Yes, I can do that. It's a story I tell sometimes. Was it me that had this experience? Possibly. I'll let the listener intuit it. I'm still under, government control. There was a time in a remote lab far, far away where an individual at 2 a.m. was decanting 10 million doses of acid into heavy wind.
Yeah.
Perhaps we should wait until it subsides a bit.
And so you're saying 10 million fits into something like this?
Right, 10 million doses will fit into a 3-liter flask about this big, 6-liter flask about this big. A dark liquid, but quite active. And the individual, 2 a.m, was up on a ladder and hands bathed in solvent, and it slipped. The solvent was methylene chloride, which goes through skin rather instantly, through gloves and skin instantly, carrying with it whatever is dissolved in it, in this case 10 million doses of LSD. So the individual shrieked, fell off the ladder into the floor, into a large puddle of methylene chloride, and 10 million doses of LSD, drenching him from head to foot. Oh my. What an experience that might be. Shall I finish the story? You probably want to know what happened.
I was going to say, yeah. I am looking forward to coming back from the commercial break.
This is all described in my book, The Rose of Paracelsus, in a chapter called Sunrise at Midnight. Well, naturally, one got off instantly. In other words, in seconds, one is as high as one has ever been personally, and probably as high as any human has ever been. And then the great question was one going to die in seizures, twitching on the floor? No human had been exposed to that quantity. Well, there's no way to, of course, call an ambulance because the whole site was just a large laboratory, and the medevacs would find that most curious. So it was a question between dying and going to jail in that moment. So what happened? There was a rush, of course, to the shower head, hanging on the shower head, stark naked, furiously scrubbing this sticky LSD freebase off of every skin surface. And lots of praying. Please, Lord, don't let me die. Don't take me away from my family. Meanwhile, of course, the vision started. Worlds without end, choirs of angels, every imaginable psychic transformation. And then a stumbling into a front room of the house where fire was burning and votives were burning and Gregorian chants were playing, just as general background for synthesis. And of course the billowing of the walls, everything's moving greatly, and staggering into a work shirt and jeans and going out on the veranda, the portal as they call it in New Mexico, of a remote site, adobe house, and enormous desert outside of Los Alamos, stretching on a full moon night before one, and just sliding down the wall, waiting, the first 15-minute peak of this unbelievably large exposure. And the question is, what happened? What happened at that moment? Well, it was a perfectly clear night in the desert. Beautiful full moon hovering over the horizon. Little cacti stretching over rolling hills. And wooden beams, vigas, they call them in New Mexico, above. And, very isolated. You could hear the night birds rustling. The soft wind moving about. And I noticed the ground was like jewels. And the air was delicious, like the perfume of goddesses and lovers. I felt tremendous bliss and comfort, like everything was all right, very all right, and would always be. And the universe was very kind and gentle. There was nothing to be afraid of. That went on throughout the night. As the full moon set and the sun rose and the dawn lit up the desert. And in the morning I realized that really nothing had happened that night. That the ultimate experience was simply our natural mind. That all these millions of doses had no effect whatsoever. That one still retained the wonder of one's childlike mind, the grace that has been bequeathed to us, the essential peace that we all have at a moment's reflection. And so that was a great teaching. That these lessons are not the gift of some drug. It's not dependent upon a drug, but simply the gift of our natural mind and heart, of who we truly are. And so with that realization, I felt very refreshed and energized. It was a beautiful morning. I had a little food and juice and went back to work.
Amazing.
What'd your wife say?
I wasn't married at the time.
Okay. I figured you'd be in big trouble.
Yeah, these sites tend to be alone.
Okay.
Yeah.
So and then it was over after like 12 hours or something. It didn't like last week. That's amazing.
And after the first 15 minutes, it was like nothing had happened at all.
Wow. Huh.
Yeah, it's like it is now.
Wow. Yeah. Cool. That was
Incredible.
life-changing. And I really do think you're on like the Mount Rushmore of human consciousness. And I understand that you might not feel that way, but I think if you look at what these drugs do and how much you made and how many people took it, I mean, I think that you are the Genghis Khan of opening minds.
I can't recall ever being described as Genghis Khan. Certainly do admire his extended family.
Yeah.
By the way, I wish people could see where we're sitting. I'm not sure if you can. They're just magnificent, huge buttes. Even living in New Mexico, I haven't seen anything quite like this. We're up a box canyon with 1,000-foot high crags on all sides.